Our hero, Ganguch Choi, was just an ordinary anime student. Okay, maybe it wasn't exactly ordinary, but it felt a bit like being alone in the world of Taku. He'd rather stay safe inside than risk stepping out among the crowd. Or maybe that was just the story Gangu liked to tell himself since he was always by himself. He spent his time battling in fighting games and cheering when he won. Maybe because he'd spent his whole life playing games, he ended up being the best gamer of them all. And yet, he wasn't truly alone anymore, for he had a friend to chat about his games with whenever he needed to. Over by the other side of the room, a guy was chatting with a group of people. Or at least that's what it should have been, because the same guy was making threats to a student, grabbed his console, and smashed it onto his head while asking if he was finally done with it. The students stammered their plea to get it back right away, unable to focus because it was so crucial to the game. Left fuming, the student started threatening him and questioning his attitude. His classmates started kicking his table too, just to cause trouble. During the process, the students' consoles accidentally shut down, a result they never meant to cause and couldn't have guessed would happen. The student started shaking and asked how he could ever dare do something so terrible. He jumped to his feet, furious because they shut down his console right when he was about to beat the level. They didn't even know how much he had struggled to get where he was, and he would never forgive them for it. The boy ran straight at the guy who was threatening him, and that guy was totally surprised by how brave he was. The others started beating the student, knocking him off his table and shouting that he didn't belong there, which is why everyone hated otakis and began hitting him while he lay on the ground. Gangu just watched the scene, which was something that often happened during class. He had just one friend left. Not the one shouting threats, but the one who was suffering right now. When school finally ended, Gango and his friend walked home, with Gango making sure his buddy was okay after seeing someone bully him just a bit earlier. He said he was okay just like he was used to saying. He didn't mind getting beaten up since he was more worried about his game, which made Ganghu laugh and left him unsure if he felt relieved or not. His friend knew he should head home to check if his save was still safe, but the protagonist told him he could just play again even if he lost it. His friend nodded and asked if he planned to take the usual path, and the protagonist agreed, reminding him not to let his guard down on the way back. The two shared a final goodbye, and Gamu kept walking through the city all by himself. He was a lonely gamer who just spent his days alone in front of the screen. He still wondered why Hyeonjin was the only one being threatened, unsure if it was because they found his reactions funny. Even Gangu had to pull over at game stores on his way back. Just then, he spotted a sign advertising an empty space for rent. This made him rush out to find out why the store was closing its rental spot. As he pushed open the doors, a woman inside the shop spotted Gangu. He waved hello to the owner, who said the store was closed for the day, but he couldn't help wondering what was going on since the place should be doing so well. That's when the owner decided to rent out the store for some reason. She explained it was just necessary, and the next week she had a goal, leaving Yengu wondering if she had finally saved up all the money she needed. Even if that were true, the protagonist felt sad because she had to close the store she'd visited since elementary school, where he would always stop on his way home from school to have fun. But the truth was that she felt sad to close up early, knowing Gao was a loyal regular who would miss the store. But now he had truly grown up and seemed focused on his studies. So the protagonist chuckled softly because there wasn't much left to buy except the few games he still didn't have. She explained that so many items had sold over the weekend that she couldn't restock, especially since she was planning to rent out the place. She asked if he'd like her to suggest a new game, and Gangu was surprised since he knew most games already. The owner told us that the whole thing was just a mobile game. The protagonist was shocked to find she could actually sell those items in her store. Usually, folks download games to their phones rather than buying them at a store. She also told him that Real World Mobile wasn't a game you usually buy, but he was able to download it because he had the QR code. She passed him the QR code to scan so he could download it and check out what it looked like. Gangu was shocked, but he did what the owner told him to do. She quickly saw that he thought he was installing it, so she asked him to head home and try it there. She thanked him once more for stopping at her shop on his way home. That was how he said goodbye to the game store that had been part of his entire childhood, and the farewell gift from the owner was that very game. Gangu had no clue that this game would soon flip his entire world inside out. As soon as he stepped inside, he told everyone he was home, and his mother rushed to welcome him. She told him to get changed and come downstairs for a meal. Back in his room, he finally admitted he was exhausted after classes. Before doing anything else, he decided to take a look at the new game that had just been released. Everyone promised the game from Real World Mobile would be a blast, but the protagonist was still curious about exactly what kind of game it turned out to be. As soon as he opened it, a message welcomed him, telling him that he was officially player 96. A guide would step in to show how the game played out. The tutorial mission shouldn't be hard, but you'll still face rewards and penalties. His first task was to chug a glass of water within an hour to earn a cool $8. But if he failed, 3 cups in the house would shatter, leaving the gang members shocked at such a small price for a huge mess. The mission began almost instantly, but Gang Choi still had no idea what to do. Because there were no buttons, only a ticking clock, Gang finally set it aside to head down for dinner. In the living room, his family laughed and chatted while watching TV to take their minds off things. His mom brought over strawberry milk, but she sprained her ankle and all 3 cups crashed to the floor, shattering instantly. They all jumped in shock and rushed to check if their mom was okay. Gangu stood there, stunned by what he had just seen, while his sisters helped her. He couldn't believe the game had actually made the penalty come true. But when he checked the time, he realized an hour had gone by since the mission began. His family stayed behind to help their mother after she fell and to clean up the mess. His sister caught him lost in his own thoughts and called out to make him stop staring at nothing. But Gangu was still lost in his own thoughts until she shouted right in his ear to snap him out of it and wake up. He sprinted away while his sister lectured him for acting so rebellious. Back in his room, the protagonist grabbed his phone without a second thought. As he looked around, the game let him know that his daily mission was ready for him. When he opened the notification, a sudden flash of light blinded him for a second. Suddenly, a girl named RA stepped in front of him, the very guide who runs the Real World Mobile. Gangu looked puzzled, but RA knew he had failed his lesson. So, 3 cups in his house were broken as a result of the penalty. The penalties in this game were always applied in real life, so he needed to stay alert. Just as RA warned, if the protagonist failed 20 more missions, the game would end, cutting off all the fun. So he had to watch his 5 daily missions closely to avoid that fate. She wrapped up the game rules for him. She said her goodbyes without even listening to his desperate requests to stay. Suddenly Gangu screamed that she was an idiot, and to his shock, the girl froze in her tracks. She spun around in a huff, so suddenly that he jumped right out of his skin. Then RA managed to smile, waved his final goodbye, and vanished from the screen. By now, Gangu couldn't help but wonder if this was even a normal game, especially since breaking cups in his own home and messing with real life didn't seem like something that should happen often. Even now, the character on the screen felt like he could truly hear his own words. The hero leaned in and typed the game's name into Google to find out everything there was to know. He eventually discovered that nothing existed about the real world. It was happening everywhere on every search app online, leaving him to wonder if Gangu should have just deleted the game forever. That's when he remembered the store owner and realized he needed to ask her about the game. Gangu packed his bag to head out even though his sisters were complaining about him. After standing by while his mother fell, he had the nerve to walk away, claiming an emergency forced him to go. Gangu left them in the dust and sprinted down the street, racing toward the store. He puzzled over why the owner had suggested that silly game and needed to find her to get the answers. Suddenly, his phone buzzed with a new daily mission, startling Gang, who paused to read the message. Rick greeted him with news of a new mission waiting to be tackled. This time was different from the tutorial since failing meant losing a life, so he had to be super careful, and while Gao was shocked by his first mission to confess to his crush, RA just kept having fun. After all, he had just 1 hour to finish this mission, because if he succeeded, he would grow a full centimeter taller. But if he failed, one of his family members would suddenly have an accident, a terrible price for his mistake. RA didn't listen to the warnings and let the mission get truly started. He still couldn't believe it was real. The girl he desperately wanted to tell her he liked was a school delinquent who looked too scary to ever get close to. Gao feared he'd end up dead from sheer embarrassment. Anyway, he couldn't believe the game was actually that real, figuring the smashed glasses were just a crazy coincidence since he still didn't buy it. But even then, a piece of him knew it couldn't be all just an act. The thought of his family getting hurt filled him with worry. For now, the hero made up his mind to finally tell his crush, Jizian, how he felt. He had never told a soul a secret in all his life. But even with his crush being a troublemaker at school, he kept trying, only to find himself in trouble, since he didn't even have her phone number. All he had was Hyen's number, and he wasn't sure if Hyen even had Jizen's to call if things went wrong. With no other choice left, he simply headed toward school. He might find an emergency list to help him out, but he still couldn't understand how things had gotten this bad. Running, the gang quickly swept past others on his way to school until he finally arrived, where he rushed through the hallway and saw the boys who used to threaten him. Some people saw him and were surprised to find him at school so early. Gamu sat all by himself at school, and that lonely feeling hurt him so much. Even though they could have tried to mess with Gangva, they decided it was too much trouble and just went to play billiards instead. Since Gangva wasn't funny and Hyen was clearly the most entertaining person to annoy, the protagonist sprinted ahead and grabbed the emergency list to call for help. Gangva realized he should have paid more attention. He didn't notice he was standing on the stage the entire time. Soon he found the number for his crush, Jizen AM, and his nerves got all jittery right away. As he got ready to call her, A wave of nervousness washed over him. Jenu couldn't do it. He didn't even know how to look her in the face after what happened. He never said a word to her at school. He only ever caught a glimpse of her from far away. Even so, he was about to have the nerve to tell her, which seemed completely ridiculous. Suddenly, while he was panicking, a guard asked why he was there and told him the school was closing. Jie jumped and hurriedly apologized to the guard for keeping him waiting. But he kept Jaison's number to call him later. After leaving the school, he knew he had to make the call because one of his family members would have gotten into an accident otherwise. So, Gang kept telling himself that he had to do this even if it hurt. He did it all for his family, yet he was so scared he couldn't even take the first step. After a long pause, Gangu finally reached for the phone, his hand shaking a little. He asked if it was Jaison's number, and when she said yes, she wanted to know who was calling. He stammered an apology for calling her out of the blue and introduced himself as a classmate, but Jaison didn't remember him. Jenu was stunned to find she had completely forgotten that he even existed. Then he laughed, admitting he was always the kid in the back of the class who never got noticed, and Jaison finally remembered. In the end, he was the odd one out at the games, still wondering how he even got her number. Feeling scared, Gangu tries to tell them what really happened. But Jaison grew impatient and demanded the truth, until Gangu finally shouted that he liked her. After a long silence, she tried to answer but the call cut out, and while he was sure even a loser like him could spot her beauty, he still found it fun. So Jaison wondered if she could use this to her advantage and called the guys who had been causing trouble at school. After hearing they were playing billiards, she flat out refused to go, saying a guy had just confessed his love to her right then. This annoyed him because Jaison was enjoying herself too much, especially since she thought he had confessed to her even though she wasn't free, while he still wanted to know the name of the playful guy at the back of the class. The guys who were threatening us got mad as hell when they heard that, and Gangu looked like he was ready to jump right off the world. The next day, the two were waiting to end his life, while Gangu was already dying of a heart attack after finally confessing. He still managed to finish his first mission, but he had no idea what lay ahead because he kept acting on a hunch. He knew it was just a game, but Gangu still hadn't managed to say what he felt. But the line went dead right in the middle, and Jaison never even made the move to call back. He keeps telling himself it's normal, knowing she'd never do that. Now wasn't the time for that, so the gang had to rush to the game store to find the owner. He even forgot everything because of the mission, which was the one thing he was always meant to do. The protagonist sprinted outside only to find himself blocking a store with its doors firmly shut. Not only was the shop empty the moment she vanished, but Yengu had also wasted precious time on his mission, leaving him with a mountain of questions about the game he now held. Sai, having lost everything, chose to walk home with his head held low. His sister immediately complained because Gangu had left home without a care, only to return so late despite his mother being hurt and glass scattered everywhere. He apologized once more, yet he knew she still couldn't understand what he had been through. His mother told her sister to settle down since Gangu hadn't really been hurt, but the sister insisted that he needed to learn a thing or two about life because he just got lost in his games and ignored everything else around him. Gangu tried to deny it and walk away when his sister came up, but she stopped short because she sensed something was off about him, though she couldn't quite put her finger on what it was. The main character was totally lost, not knowing why he decided to act that way. She noticed that Gangu looked a little taller than usual. They used to stand side by side at the same height, but then he suddenly grew taller. After thinking about it, Mom admitted he seemed taller even though he was still young and could grow more, but his sister thought it was strange that he shot up so fast instead of gradually, and the speed of his growth felt too suspicious. The protagonist stammered nervously that he was blowing a tiny problem out of proportion, then fled to his room to sleep and avoid it all, leaving Gamu wondering exactly what that silly game was all about. The very next day, he made up his mind to head out to school, just like his sisters did. He hadn't slept well the night before, so his head was still a mess. His other sister spoke up, still amazed that Gamu really was taller than expected. She hadn't noticed before since she was always shorter, and honestly, the protagonist wasn't worried about it much. Another girl popped up and said it was time for everyone to head to school together. The girl, who was his sister's friend, waved hello to him. She chose to walk beside Gangu and say their goodbyes so they could meet again later. Jenu felt things were going right for the moment, and since he wanted to be by himself, he could finally clear his mind. Just then, a voice came up to ask if he really thought he'd be left all by himself. One of the guys made a threat and laughed because Gangu looked too busy to stop him. The bad kid said he'd just heard Gangu tell Jaison the truth. Even the hero had totally forgotten about that moment because he was so deep in the game. Gangu walked to school with his shady friend right by his side. He laughed at him because a loser had the guts to hit on the girl. Even the hero himself wasn't sure how he had suddenly found the guts to speak up. But the troublemaker reveals that Jaison was actually Dong's girlfriend all along. And dang, the scary guy who threatened his friend Hyan, was quite terrifying. Gang stopped dead in his tracks, realizing with a jolt that he had never known the truth until this very moment. In the end, he was so glued to his game screen that he completely lost track of what was happening around him. Right then, the protagonist admitted he didn't know that when he confessed, but the delinquent scoffed, saying he should have been in trouble for picking a fight with the school's top enforcer, Deong, and it was shocking to see the guy praising him only for Gangu to brush it off as another mistake before Deong chased after him to exact revenge. The bad kid gave Gangu a friendly pat on the back to wish him good luck. However, Gang knew that things were only going to get worse. Things weren't going well, so for now he had to skip school and run away. If he got careless and ran into that guy, he'd actually get killed for real. But then Gang got a message saying a new mission was waiting for him. This made him furious since the game was wasting his time and he had nothing else to do. It could have been life or death, but RA ignored his fear and greeted Gangu just the same. She beamed with joy even at the sight of him looking like a loser for such a simple first-day task. So all he needed to do was stay awake and pay attention in his first class. Gangu couldn't believe how bold that game assistant was. She laughed at Gangu and how he'd always have a hard time at school because of her. Even though it was the toughest mission ever, RA promised that he'd get a great reward for finishing it. If he failed the mission, his little sister would have gotten hurt later. The gang saw the game was cursed because it was putting him under so much pressure. The punishments were always far too harsh, even by his own standards. RA turned a deaf ear to the complaints and simply wished Gamu luck as he headed off on the mission. Now he had no choice but to make the mission work, and skip it wasn't an option. Gamu didn't stay away long, but he rushed back to school still trembling from worry about his life. He noticed students whispering and trading rumors all around him. It was the class loser who suddenly confessed his feelings to Jaisen, and since he was known for only playing poorly, his bold move caused a huge stir that made everyone realize Dawn was furious. Gang felt like he was going to snap as the rumors spread all over. Before long, Deong himself walked into the classroom and gave him a shock. Other troublemakers said they'd head out to hassle the freshmen. But Dawn refused to give in now because something even bigger was at stake. Gangu was so grumpy that even Heya could see he was worried about something. As the first lesson began, the protagonist strained to focus, but it was a struggle. Jaisen wore a confident smile as she shared the news with her boyfriend. Before the lesson was even over, the teacher told the class to get their homework done. Once they were by themselves, a classmate walked up to Gangu. He told him to follow, and now at the school exit, the protagonist bumped right into the delinquents. Some of them moved fast to make sure the teachers wouldn't see what was going on. Even though Gamu was shaking with fear as a student stepped up to ask why he confessed to Dang's girlfriend, the students ignored his desperate claim that he didn't know her, because the real anger was on Deong thanks to Gangu, and the whole class was in a terrible mood because of it. It wasn't long before the hero took a hard punch right to the face. Anyone would get so mad if a fool admitted that to her girlfriend, and this guy was no exception. Some girls, including Jaisen who sighed at the thought of not talking about it, watched the scene with laughter. They laughed at Gangu as the expected loser, but Jizian felt strange because she needed to tell her boyfriend, knowing that mentioning Deong would be a death sentence for him, while for Jaisen it was just a game and his own confession was the real mistake. The girls were having a great time, but cruel Jaisen didn't care about anything, exactly as expected. Meanwhile, Gangu was getting beaten up like a common scumbag. Everyone laughed at him for staying quiet while getting beaten, especially since that strange guy who always sat alone in the back somehow dared to admit he was dating the strongest and scariest girl at school. They never thought anyone would actually have the guts to do something like that. While Gang stayed silent, they hit him harder and harder just to make him speak. They started beating him like a sack of potatoes and never stopped. They laughed at Gamu because he was letting them beat him, thinking he was just an idiot. The hero couldn't believe he had to suffer so much over a stupid game. He wondered if his fear was so strong that the pain from the fight barely registered. The guys wanted Gangu to at least fight back or cry to make the whole thing worthwhile and get his reputation back. Even though he was brave when he confessed before, he was acting scared now and should have tried at least a little, while Gang just kept apologizing without knowing what else to do. Then one of them suggested a new idea, saying they could try something different. He pointed to one of the men on the side, saying that if he could fight him and win, they would let him go. It looked like fun, but the guy who got challenged was still super mad that it happened. He wondered if Gangu truly wanted to fight him and if he was strong enough to handle it. Even though the main character said he didn't refuse, he clearly wasn't ready to take his words. If he didn't fight back, they'd just keep hitting him until he was broken. But they actually wanted to make him stronger than that. Gangu was forced to fight that guy against his will. When the protagonist refused to lift his hands, he rushed right at him. They were furious because the protagonist wouldn't even try to fight back. At least this got Genghis to clench his fists while others took pleasure in watching him hold on. Just like a brave hero should, They didn't plan to hold back against him. The hero took a hard hit as the student pushed back. Gangu couldn't believe the unfairness of it all and wondered why he had to deal with this. Jaisen watched and laughed while his classmates smiled as they recorded the whole scene. Gangu's face twisted in anger as he shouted that he hadn't done anything wrong and asked why they were treating him so badly. He shoved his opponent away before anyone could blink. They all stopped dead in their tracks, shocked to see the guy zoom away as fast as a piece of paper in the wind. He was still shaking where he stood after shoving the man away, and then he realized just how much power he had suddenly unleashed. The others stood there, totally baffled by what they had just witnessed. The gang turned back to their friends, and one of them bolted for help, just like everyone else who didn't want to end up in his grasp. In that instant, the hero felt the world shift beneath his feet once more. He sprinted to his phone to check the game and found he'd finished the mission, gaining a strength point that let him push the guy right into the air. Half stunned by everything that just happened, the protagonist turned and ran away. In the park, he stopped to think about everything that had just happened. It was all because of that game, which gave him one more point of strength. Yet the force he drove into that push was simply enormous. Suddenly, Gangu found himself suddenly becoming too strong, even though nothing felt different inside him. That made him eager to try out his new power, perhaps by kicking a tree to see what would happen. Even though he had grown stronger, a giant tree still shouldn't be knocked over this easily. He walked up to the tree, convinced he'd never thrown a punch in his life and hadn't even hit a punching bag to train. Gangu took a deep breath to calm his nerves and convince himself that kicking the tree wouldn't break his fist or cause any real harm. He'd just give it a gentle kick to check its strength, and so he did. To his shock, the tree snapped right in the middle, yet it stayed standing. The crowd watched him in silence, confused by Gangu's strange moves. When he realized what he was about to do, he screamed and ran, shocked by how close he came to ruining that tree. If he'd punched his opponent before, the fight would have ended in a disaster. Gonglu realized he could have turned into a killer, and that thought terrified him. He had to balance his fear of heavy punishments with the need to truly understand the game, knowing that acting on impulse could lead him straight into a big disaster. When he checked his game stats, he saw his strength had only gone up by 1, a rare moment when the usual status screen details didn't appear. Gangu spotted some strange items that seemed to belong to a dungeon. He couldn't stop himself from wanting to press that button to see what would happen, but RA stepped in and said he needed to reach level 5 before stepping into the dungeon. So, as expected, he still couldn't get inside. So, he checked his game stats and was shocked by what he saw. Since his current strength started at 1.1, he knew his original power was just 0.1. That explained his sudden surge in strength. He was now 10 times tougher than before, even though his current stats still looked pretty weak. Gangu stared at the stats, confused that his luck could possibly be 2 points. After all, he was just suffering from that cursed game, unaware that his journey into the real world was driven by something far greater than bad luck. But the truth would soon catch up to him. Soon, you'll uncover the real story of where this game started. Meanwhile, Deong's blood boiled with rage the moment he learned that Gangu had taken out the delinquent. Not to mention that all his other henchmen had scattered like frightened rats, making him wonder if they should be fired from being pickpockets given how utterly useless they were. The guys stammered that Deong was wrong because Gangu was stronger than they expected, even though Deong couldn't believe it since it was always 3 against 1 before. And yet, they kept making excuses for how bad they were, insisting that Gangu's strength was so wild it felt like magic. Despite thinking their talk made no sense, Deong refused to leave Ganghu alone with a useless crew and decided to train the kid himself. In the meanwhile, the hero slipped out of class and kept walking. He wanted to head home, but after the fight, he was left with nothing but the clothes on his back since he forgot his backpack at school. As long as Gangu had that power, he'd stay out of the fight and never get knocked down. But he still didn't want to go to class because he was sure he'd get into trouble. So he decided to skip class and walk alone, only for his phone to suddenly ring with a call asking where he was. The person on the other line, Deong, asked if he wasn't going back to school. He couldn't just run away from the fight like a coward, especially after messing with someone else's girl so boldly. Dang knew Gangu always got stuck in games, but he never imagined Idia had the strength to fight back, making him wonder if he should have stepped up to defend his girlfriend, especially when another guy warned him that Gangu's power was truly unstoppable. But Dang yelled for them to be quiet because they were just wasting time. He yelled for Gangu to rush to the school rooftop immediately, because with his backpack in hand, the kid's precious games and consoles would be turned to dust if he didn't hurry to face the man threatening them. Jenu froze in fear, realizing they had taken his games as hostages. Dong warned that if he didn't return before class ended, he'd teach them a lesson, especially since his only friend Hyan had always been bullied, and Dong promised to beat anyone who made them look weak so everyone would know better. Damu asked why he had to be part of this, but Don just stayed silent, finding it fun to see how desperate he looked. As time passed, the students headed to class and so did Dong. His classmates still thought he'd struggle with Gangu. They realized there was no fighting someone so strong, so they were scared and desperate to stop Dong before it was too late. Soon, the students spotted Gangu back in the classroom, and he quickly apologized for being so late. The teacher just let him come back without asking any questions. Hyen and Deong stopped what they were doing and gave the protagonist a long look the second he walked in. Gangu breathed a sigh of relief, realizing they hadn't chased Hyen yet. At least the others noticed he stepped up to face the fight. As the minutes ticked by, the final class finally came to a close. It wasn't long before Deong moved up to meet Gangu. He doubted if he had made a mistake by picking a fight, and the protagonist tried to explain that it was just a misunderstanding, but Dong told him to shut up after hearing that Gangu had just defeated Minsu earlier, yet he still thought he could keep messing with his girlfriend like that. The protagonist pleaded that it was just a mix-up, but Deong laughed and said he always heard that excuse when things went wrong, so instead he just told him to follow him up to the roof to sort it out. There was no way out, so they dragged him to the roof to face his final battle. It felt like they were constantly misunderstanding each other, but since Deong wasn't good with words, Giri didn't think they could ever fix their problems. Dong decided to settle things with fists since he wanted to see Gangu's famous punch in action. And when Dong admitted that fighting was how he felt, Gangu just asked if that would make him feel better. Now that he had taken down Minsu, his two foolish followers were so scared of him that they couldn't even look at him. Deong charged at the protagonist like a charging bull, forcing Gangman to realize instantly that he had no choice but to hold his own. As he thought about it, he realized he was in deep trouble and figured it would be better to just let Don beat him up and leave him alone. He thought his special status was a shield against pain, but the first punch proved him wrong, hurting him so badly he had to step back immediately. He believed that some troublemakers were different from the rest because they seemed stronger than most. Deong was left puzzled as he simply absorbed the blows without planning to strike back. While everyone watched Jenu take the hits and Dong begged him to fight back to avoid getting hurt, he almost forgot to mention that he had already smashed all the consoles in his backpack, which shocked Gang and sent Deong flying away immediately. One furious punch knocked him down and ended the fight. The wall cracked under the force of it all while two second-year students were in the middle of a fight. Everyone was stunned because that crazy fight actually happened right on the school roof, even though most of us only heard about it instead of seeing it ourselves. He didn't wait long to break the news to his family that he'd been kicked out of school. His sister shook him in anger, desperate to know how such a thing could happen. They simply couldn't believe their brother Gangu, who was normally out of this, had somehow ended up involved in the mess anyway. Even Gangu's own mother was stunned when he started fighting, and his sister was so proud that after he took on multiple opponents, she shook him hard to tell him to stop, which is why they had to call his mom to the school and left G feeling almost dizzy. While watching him grow taller, build muscle and get stronger, his sister paid close attention to every change. She couldn't help but wonder if he had always been this way, since she had no idea he was secretly working out. Gang decided he needed to get back to his room to rest a little, stepping away from her because he was tired and his head was still spinning from the fight they just had. Then, out of nowhere, a roll of toilet paper flew and slammed right into his head. It made him angry because his sister had been unbearable for the last few days. She screamed at Gamu for ignoring the trouble she was bringing to their mother. She stormed off to school after the fight, not even bothering to explain why. The gang quickly saw she was hurting because she hadn't even tried to say sorry to her mom. Their mom looked so tired that she sighed and told her daughter to stop. Yet, all he could do was tell them he had no choice. He stomped off, grumbling all the way because they kept bothering him. His sister was startled by his rebellious reaction, and since she couldn't make sense of him when he stopped talking to her, she never could understand him. Even Gamu felt frustrated because they had no idea what had happened. He felt hot under the collar because the game stress had made him lose his cool. Sai and the protagonist lay down for a quick rest. Gangva realized he had no right to be mad at them for this. He knew why they were asking those annoying questions, yet he was so stressed from the game that he felt like going crazy, and he realized telling them about it would only make them doubt him, leaving him completely stuck. Just as Gang was thinking, a new message popped up on his real-world mobile screen. RA finally showed up on the screen and gave the hero a warm hello. She gave him a big hand for getting every single daily mission done without a single mistake. Yet Gang shot back that anyone could take on those missions with such harsh consequences. RA looked set to keep playing and promised to share more about the game. He can glance at the explanation screen to read the game rules. The most important rule for everyone in the real world was simple. He could invite up to 3 other friends to join him. The gang was caught off guard, but RA kept explaining that whoever got the invite could choose to join, and then they would suddenly become players in the real world, which left him shocked. The second rule said the game could hold exactly 100 players, meaning no new friends could join until someone left or got knocked out. Yang finally understood the limit that explained the screen he saw, since he had entered the game as player 96. The assistant explained that they could always verify the player count, and since the real-world mobile version was exclusive to this country, every single player in the game was Korean with no one else joining in. Now the final rule explained how they could get out of the game. Daniel asked RA how the game worked, and she told him that players usually take on 5 to 20 missions a day, each starting with 20 life points that end the game once they hit 0. If he failed a mission, he'd lose a life point, and after about 20 such failures, the game would end his player's life for good, though he could also quit anytime he wanted, which finally wrapped up the rules as RA finished and said goodbye. The gang knew they could walk away from the game at any moment they chose. Then RA saw his chance and set a new challenge: 10 laps around the school field before the day was done. Finishing the mission would put $76 in his account. But if he failed, one of his greatest treasures would be destroyed, and Gang grew so angry at Ra's words that he just walked away without saying another word. The main character kept wondering how to slip away whenever he pleased. So, he went out and ran just like the mission demanded. He had no plans to quit so soon because he was determined to finish the game at all costs, sticking to his usual rule of seeing any game through no matter how hard it was, and Jenu couldn't help but wonder if he could actually pull it off or if he would lose to something so ridiculous. Good things were coming his way as he grew taller, stronger, and more confident, with Dong and his friend cheering him on while the delinquents stared in shock at how hard Gamu trained for 5 days since his suspension. He thought it was pretty weird that he wasn't allowed to go to school when he wasn't there. But from then on, Gangu made sure to finish his daily missions, which always meant doing the specific exercises he needed to do. This let him earn rewards and levels from missions, and though he could have spent points to grow stronger each time he leveled up, he foolishly saved them all, ending up with 3 hidden points before he realized how powerful they were. Before long, Gangu hit level 5 and RA cheered him on. Now that he hit level 5, he was finally free to wander the dungeon whenever he wanted. He recalled seeing the dungeon button before but couldn't reach it, and now that Gangu thought about it, he realized he'd never been able to get inside before. It used to be locked away by a level limit, but now it's finally open for him to use. He wondered what treasures lay waiting inside the dungeon, since clearing one usually meant great rewards, just like in normal RPG games. Jenu hesitated, wondering if giving it a shot might be interesting and earn him some real-life rewards, but he paused to remember that he still didn't fully understand how this game worked. It couldn't have been met with an even crazier penalty for entering the dungeon, especially when considering the penalties he had seen so far. If dying in that dungeon meant actually dying in real life, Gang wisely decided to stay out of it since he had no reason to take such a risk. Even so, he couldn't stop himself from wanting to peek inside the dungeon. His curiosity was so great that he couldn't sleep, and in a sudden rush, he finally unlocked the door. He just had to take the test and find out how far he could go. Gangu clicked through to peek inside the dungeon just for a short while. He peeked one last time before deciding to click on the dungeon and head inside. He was level 5, so he would be whisked away to the matching dungeon. In any case, if things got too scary, he could just take off right then. Trembling from fear, Gangu clicked the button and rushed straight into the dungeon. A blinding flash forced the protagonist to shut his eyes, and when he opened them again, Gangu had vanished from his room and was now standing in the middle of nowhere. He wondered if he had truly ended up in a dungeon. Now he knew he had truly been whisked away into madness. A gang that was lost, trying to find its way home, suddenly saw something strange happen right in front of them. A screen popped up telling him he had just 10 hours to hunt down 10 huge brown bears. The mission would end in failure if the clock ran out or you lost your life. By the end, he had no choice but to do it, and then suddenly something blew up behind him, making him fear it might be an earthquake. But when he looked up, he saw brown bears coming toward him to fight. Jenu jumped in surprise when he realized these were real bears, and this was far from a game. He knew he had to hunt 10 of those big, dangerous beasts, but with his current stats, he was sure he could take them down. The bear lunged right at him and Gangu froze for a split second, got hit, and was knocked flying. That really hurt, and he thought his strength didn't matter. In the end, a bear's strength would always be a little too much for a human to handle. It was clear that without that extra point of strength, he would have already died. Now that he thought it over, he still had those 4 saved points, and this was his best chance to decide exactly how to use them. His body still struggled to move after the hit he took earlier. The bears kept charging at the protagonist with pure fury. With Gongnu's life fading fast, he had to fight hard to win. He chose to sharpen one skill for quick hands and build up the other 2 for raw power. He barely managed to block the full attack aimed at him. It was right up against his skin, but the hero made it through. Now he had managed to tweak his stats before things got too dangerous. The bear was ready to end his life with one move, but now he could fight back even though it felt crazy to do so. With just 1 more point, he grew mighty, and adding 2 more made it possible, causing Gongun to jump when he felt his own moves become light as a feather. With his strength points boosted, he practically flew through the air every time he jumped. He quickly apologized before sending the bear flying away like it was made of paper. They were trying to kill him, so he had no choice but to run even though a furious bear was charging right after him. He still had 9 more to fight, but he had only knocked down 1 so far. So the new battle started between him and the bears, with him taking hits and then hitting back. That gave him the power to fly, yet even with better stats, getting hit still hurt. Gino had to keep his guard up while taking them down. He knew he couldn't take them all at once, so he had to find a way to win. Determined, he sprinted across the rough ground to lead the bears. Even though they were all built differently and moved at different speeds. Their speeds weren't the same, so they began to drift apart. With one powerful kick, Gangu sent the second bear flying. The next 3 were also brought down just a moment later. When it was done, all 10 bears lay defeated, but the fight had drained him completely. He had never worked so hard in his life, and for the first time he thought he might die trying, but he somehow made it through. The mission was a success, and the game even offered him a chance to wake up in the real world. He clearly wanted to rush home, so he tapped the agree button without a second thought. Gang rushed back to his room without delay, and that was a huge relief. What truly shocked him was that the bear's pain eventually softened. When R.A. picked up his phone, he praised him for finally finishing the cleaning of the dungeon. Now he could slip into the dungeon once a day to get fresh rewards. The day ended with a sweet bonus. Your level went up and you found a wooden staff. R.A. promised to upgrade his weapons after cleaning the dungeon, noting that these special items only worked inside the dungeon, before saying goodbye to the protagonist so she could return later to talk about her next mission. Gong-ai noticed a fresh mission had popped up on his phone. Now he had to find new friends and other players from the real world of mobile games. It was tough for Gangu because he had no real-life friends to turn to. It was impossible to be friends with anyone who also played that game, so he decided to quit the mission for the first time since there was no penalty for stopping, even though making allies could earn him experience, and his family had to keep calling Gangu to pull him out of his thoughts during dinner. They wondered what was bothering him since he was so distracted and ignoring his mom. He was taken by surprise when his mother asked if he would go back to school. After all, his suspension was up the next day, and Yengu hadn't even remembered that. He chuckled softly, ready to head back to school, and his mother sighed without any preparations, though she was completely shocked by this sudden change. Gangu had been so busy with his missions that he forgot about school, but he knew scary threats were coming his way again. Suddenly, he felt a buzz in his pocket as a brand new mission appeared, waiting just for him. Just like always, the notifications popped up at the worst possible moments. Gonguide stood there, unsure of what this mission was really about. With that, he finished his breakfast so fast that his family was shocked. Then he left the dishes there, thanked them for the meal, and hurried away. His sister kept complaining about his bad manners and how quickly he ate. Even then, his mother waved Gangu on to keep moving and not to worry. The sister kept making excuses for her son's weird behavior instead of asking herself why he was acting that way. He kept walking around with his cell phone and vanishing whenever he saw it, which made his sisters think it must be a girlfriend waiting for his call, a clue they had somehow missed. His mother was thinking the exact same thing, which was a real shock. His mother, though not trying to eavesdrop, caught Ganga talking to himself in his room with a woman's voice, so she guessed he must have a girlfriend. She was surprised, but not really, since her son was growing up. Normally, Gang was a lonely loner, but then something amazing happened and he found a girlfriend, making his mother overjoyed. Even his nagging sister finally quieted down, realizing he had someone to lean on, which meant he was growing up and could now focus on his calls. The mother decided that everyone needed to be kinder and more patient with him. Meanwhile, Gao rushed to his room to check out the new mission Rico had given him. Time flew by until his suspension was over, and he was finally free to go back to school. But when he came back, the air felt wrong, and Sai saw everyone whispering about him and stepping back in fear. It was all because of what happened with Diong, and the other troublemakers were running away from him. When they saw the protagonist shaking in fear, they ran away, but Gangu had never had a friend to lose, and Namu was shunned for a good reason. His teachers were stunned because he was always the quiet kid in the corner, so they never guessed he'd end up sending a classmate to the hospital. Gango apologized to his teacher for causing so much trouble, and though it had been years since anyone was suspended, she worried he'd made more problems, so he promised to behave and just wanted a quiet life until graduation, which seemed safe until the student council president asked him to stop by and talk about what happened. The protagonist ended up saying he never thought he'd ever need to say that. But halfway there, he ran into Dion. He jumped at the sight of him, but Don just asked how things were going. He never thought he'd lose to an attack like that, especially since he'd never been beaten in a fight, not even by teachers or students from other schools. Gangu chuckled nervously, hoping he had at least gotten better since then. The truth is that Diong never thought he'd be humiliated in front of his friends, so when he kicked Gangu in the face, the boy just stood there like a statue. Dong was shocked and couldn't figure out what kind of person he was. Gangu laughed in a nervous way, acting like he had no idea what he was talking about. Don couldn't believe how shamelessly he was acting. Sure, a normal person wouldn't stay standing after getting kicked in the face. Still putting on a show, the protagonist claimed he had to rush off to the student council, apologized as he bolted, and left the other person behind, which made Don furious because he knew he'd have to put up with him until graduation. As he made his way to the student council room, he found Sheem, the president and a player of Real World Mobile, already waiting for him. She waited for Gang to arrive so they could talk, and after running for a while, Gangu checked to see if they had finally stopped following him. As he thought about it, he realized the Real World Mobile game was truly amazing. He had practically turned into a superhuman after leveling up and racking up points. Then he realized he needed to make his way to the student council room this time. While the delinquents walked and talked about Genu, they had no idea he planned to return to school so soon or that a kid like him could fight that well. They held their breath, fearing Gangu would show up to take his revenge, because if he did hit them, they might just as well be dead. This meant the two of them would have to keep their mouths shut until they graduated, since their hard lives had led them to end up in the same class as the weird kid. Even though they thought he was just a loser they could overlook, that was the result. Actually, he wasn't a total failure because he still had his friend, Hyam Jun, always standing by his side. Those troublemakers were so angry they started thinking about taking it out on him. They couldn't bring down Gao, but they had a chance to take out Hyen. The two moved up to Hyen and gave him a sharp slap on the back of his neck right away. He stared at the troublemakers with a look that said they were acting stupid, which made them angry, while Hyen tried to look tough now that his friend was back. But he was surprised when Hyen dodged the punch he was about to throw. It was shocking to see, but then suddenly he started acting that way. As the others started laughing at him for failing to hit such a foolish target, he realized he was looking worse than he had intended. Hyen said it was enough and he got his eyes locked in on the game. Furious at being ignored, the rowdy kid screamed, blaming Gangu's return or perhaps just feeling lucky to dodge a punch. Suddenly, Hyen jumped up and caught the new punch thrown by the delinquent. Even the other troublemaker charged at him, and he just sent the guy flying right back. Hyen humiliated the two of them right in front of the students. They couldn't believe it, but Hyen had suddenly grown strong. Eventually, he turned from a fan into a player himself. Meanwhile, Gang finally made it to the student council room, a place he had never been and never thought he'd see again before graduation. The nervous Gang took a deep breath to gather courage before stepping into the room for good. Someone knocked on the door, and the person inside said, "You can come in." He walked in, asked for permission, and apologized for being late. Kim beamed with joy as she spotted the hero, her long wait finally over. Right away, Gangu apologized for the earlier trouble and promised to stay out of it until he graduated, leaving her surprised since she hadn't even called him to talk about it. She just wanted to check one thing, so Kim asked if he played Real World Mobile. That surprise caught him off guard, and when Gangu asked what she meant, Kim replied that she had a knack for spotting troublemakers the moment she saw one. The only thing that made sense for the strength he possessed now was that he was real. The gang stammered that they knew nothing about her story, which made her laugh. After all, it looked like he was trying to hide, but now there was no point in it. Kim shoved Gangu hard against the wall, and it was genuinely scary. As she told him she was also a player, he threw himself to the side to dodge her. It was shocking to see a girl with such incredible brute strength. She was having a great time until Kim, who hadn't expected to see anyone else at school, looked on in total shock. She never thought he'd meet someone like her, especially someone so strong. Now that he remembered this, he felt driven to make allies. As he finally stopped, he saw the situation and pulled out his phone to check the mission. But just as he turned to look, he found the job marked as finished for some strange reason. Even though Gangu had never added a friend before, he couldn't help but wonder what had gone wrong. Kim pressed him for what happened next, but he froze, cutting his answer short. He didn't know what had gone on until he noticed that Hyen was now listed as his friend. Then RA stepped forward to celebrate his success, handing over a big reward of experience as promised. So he climbed to level 8, which shocked him, and Kim asked what had made him so distracted. She hoped to get a friend request, so Gangu asked how to send one, and Kim explained that it worked just like social media, where anyone in his real-life contacts would automatically become his friend in the game. He passed his phone to the president so she could handle it herself. The gang was curious about when their friend Hea finally joined the game. Even though the other game store had shut its doors, the whole situation still felt pretty strange. But Gangu saw that Kim was slipping away and suddenly threw open the window. She casually tossed his phone away, leaving him completely shocked. The protagonist jumped, wondering why she was doing that, because now he couldn't even see his missions on his broken phone, let alone the penalties. That was just the story Kim told him to keep him guessing, since she had secretly kept the phone instead of tossing it away. The gang got mad because messing with his heart like that wasn't funny. She handed the phone back and said she only wanted to pull a prank. After all, it was incredibly silly of him to hand his phone to another player without a second thought. Because if a mean person broke it or stole it, he'd be in big trouble. He ended up paying the price, and the gang finally saw they were right. Kim told him to watch out and be extra careful if he ran into another player again. Several people saw him as a rival, so when Gangu asked why she returned his phone instead of breaking it, she explained that others treated it like a contest. But Kim chose kindness to warn him, which made her laugh since she felt safe with him now. Gangu was a bit taken aback since the words felt like a compliment of some sort. After speaking with him, it didn't look like Gangu was facing the delinquents just to show off. He felt a weight lift off his shoulders since she finally understood why he did what he did. Anyway, she decided to let him go since they had met, just to see what kind of guy Gangu really was, so she wrote her number in his phone. As he stepped out of the president's office, the protagonist let out a long sigh, surprised to find another player so soon and realizing the student council president was just one of many gamers, while Gangu felt pure joy at finally having someone to talk to about the game. Thinking about it, he realized Hyan was on his contact list too. There was no way it could be a mistake, so Gangu had to find his friend and ask him. Suddenly, he heard screams from people watching something outside the window. When Gang went to check, he found Hyan punching up two delinquents. Hyan stood calm and steady, swatting away the charging delinquents as if they were nothing more than flies buzzing around him. They were all trembling in fear as he looked like a terrifying monster, knocking them down one by one. After he took on all the troublemakers alone, they stared in awe, wondering how a human could have fists so strong. He explained that they got called the loser otaku and a loner because they had underestimated everyone else. They should be the ones constantly pushing and pressuring him, making Nava feel good about getting beaten up by a loser like Otaku. The bad kids cried from their pain while the others just stood there in shock. Gangu watched as the students begged him to stop. He didn't know how strong Hyam had become, but he only ever marked a single tree when he was just starting out at level 1. If a real-world player used their powers on a normal person, they could kill them. But Hyan didn't care. He just pushed the troublemakers, asking over and over if they were actually enjoying it. The delinquents cried and cursed at him, acting tough just because he had gotten a little stronger, even daring to say they'd go after his mother, which only made Hyan angrier, so he hit them even harder. Just then, Gangu leaped in to stop it all from happening. He wanted to know what his friend was up to, because doing this could really hurt him. The other students stood frozen in shock as he leaped from the high floor right before their eyes, watching the scene with wide, surprised eyes. Even though Hyan wanted to know if the protagonist really jumped from above, Gage said they could talk about that later because there was something more important, noting that the delinquent was clearly trying to kill him and that hitting people like that doesn't just leave a few bruises. Hyan challenged whether Gu truly wanted to guard that worthless piece of trash, especially since Gang himself had sent one of them to the hospital. The protagonist burst out laughing because he desperately wished he hadn't done that. Still, Hyan figured that if Genu got his revenge on the troublemakers, then he'd have every right to do the same. It was completely ridiculous, especially since Gangu only faced a single day of trouble while Hyan was threatened for his entire life and humiliated in front of everyone. So Gangu admitted he never meant to do it on purpose and just lost control of his scary powers without realizing how dangerous they were. Hyam shouted for him to move aside, and the insult made him want to strike back with all his might. Gangu still begged him to stop because he'd gone too far, and he needed to remember how much pain those guys had caused him for so long. So he decided to seize his chance and crush them all with his bare hands, kicking them without a single thought for the mess he was making or what would happen next. Gang didn't hesitate long to step in front and save the delinquent. Hyan asked what that ADL was doing to get in the way and kept asking his friend to calm down and at least listen, because if he ended up taking this guy's life, he would just have more problems than before. Hyam felt annoyed because Gangu would never know the pain they put him through. Even though Gangu watched silently every day as the man got beaten, he knew revenge was his only right because that friend had never offered a single hand of help. That's how he decided the other guy was a fake and quickly pushed him away. The protagonist stood up anyway, while Hyang wanted to punch the delinquent. Even though they had fallen unconscious, he planned to keep hitting them all the way to the end. They need to look back on their mistakes and live a good life in the next world. Gangu lunged at his friend with a punch, but Hyan slipped out of the way. He could tell his friend wasn't acting like himself lately. Gangu tossed the unconscious delinquent toward the others and shouted for them to leave right now. Just as the bad guys ran away, Hyan charged right at the hero. As the two started trading blows, the hyena yelled, asking if he couldn't understand him. Amidst the crowd, it was only Jengu who truly understood his rage, yet he stubbornly stood in his path. The protagonist said he understood but asked the other person to calm down and talk things over before doing anything. Hyan didn't listen to him and kept running straight at Gangu, filled with rage. The other students just stood there watching and recording, totally amazed. No one could understand the wild fight between the two, who looked like pro fighters causing so much destruction. Dion watched in shock from the courtyard as he realized Gangu was fighting again. He was even more shocked to see Gamu fighting Hyan. Gangu tossed his friend out of the way of Dawn, who was staring in total confusion. Suddenly, Kim popped up and told everyone to stop right now. If they kept making trouble for the school, she'd end up killing both of them. Hyan asked who she was, but warned that if she stood in his path, she would end up hurt. This made her mad because he was talking to his boss just like that. He told her to vanish because she was getting too involved in his life. Kim couldn't believe that a boy just like him would act this way toward her. Gangu told him to settle down because he was the council president, but Hyan couldn't help grumbling that Gangu was acting bossy around someone who was easily threatened. Her words just made him angrier, but Kim told him he wanted revenge. Just as he finally got the power to be exactly who he wanted to be, it only made his head hurt. They were known as the real-world mobile. Hyan was caught off guard by the twist, even though she had known about the game all along. But she seized the chance to dart away and kick him hard. She quickly hushed him just as others could still hear him. Jenu sprinted to check on his friend, only to find him fainting mid-stride, so Kim insisted they head to the infirmary and kept Jenu from causing any more trouble. Gangu nodded in agreement, ready to head to the council room with her after lunch. A short time later, the hero dragged his friend to the infirmary to get some help. This was such a crazy situation that Gangu never even imagined it could happen. He'd just made it onto her friend list, so the protagonist figured Hyan had to have joined the game pretty much at the same time. With a heavy sigh at his still sleeping friends, he chose to dive back into the game to see what was happening. He opened his friends list and found that both Hyan and Kim were still on it. He wasn't sure what would happen if he clicked on his friend's picture. As soon as he did that, Gangu could see his friend's whole character sheet, which showed he was only level 2 and had just started playing that day after barely finishing a mission. Yet he couldn't help wondering how Hyan managed to join, since Daniel had only slipped in after being invited over by someone else using a QR code. Just then, Hyan suddenly said he'd been invited too, leaving him completely shocked. He said the shopkeeper handed him the link to join the game too. Gangu noticed his friend waking up and said he felt dizzy but would be okay if he stayed still, which was a relief, even though Gam wondered about the missing shop owner and the game shop that had already closed. Hyan agreed, but noted it happened before the shop closed, recalling the day some delinquents broke his console while trying to provoke him. Right from the start, likely even on the same day as Gangu, signs everywhere in front of the shop warned that it would be closing soon. So Hyan dashed inside just in time. It turned out Hyan managed to fix his console just by visiting the shop, but since the owner was closing up on her last day, she couldn't spend all the time needed to finish the job and had to apologize. Instead, she suggested she'd play a game to distract him, and that's when she handed him the real mobile game link. But he just set it up and ignored the contents until then, preferring his usual console and mobile games, a choice that made the protagonist laugh because he saw himself in that same preference. While heading to school one day, Hyan decided to try out the new game. That game was truly amazing. Finishing a mission meant real rewards, so he used it to level up often and quickly became insanely powerful, a fact Gangu easily understood with a laugh. But he still felt it wasn't right to try to kill those delinquents, so Hyan protested again, scolding his friend even though he knew how much suffering he had endured all this time. Yet Gangu knew he was pushing too far and almost costing them their lives, a mistake that could have landed him in jail for life. Hyan shot back that he'd been in charge the whole time and that people weren't just dying because of him, especially since Gangu was the one who started seeking revenge. The protagonist hurriedly tried to say it was all a mistake, but Haeyoung still felt it was unfair that he was being so two-faced. Soon, a fresh voice cut in to shout at the group who were just having fun. Deong appeared and said, "They seem to be having a lot of fun." Hyan chuckled at the perfect chance to settle old scores, but Deong urged patience, wanting to speak with them first about learning exactly what this rumored real-world mobile truly was. The gang finally realizes he accidentally caught their whole conversation while he was around. Even with their problems, they chose to leave and talk about something else, with Ganga laughing and focusing on Hyam so he could feel better. Taeyong made sure they didn't act like fools, since he had overheard their plan to get real-life rewards and powers from outside the recovery room. Jenu explains that they were only discussing a light novel and it was all pretend. And Dion admits that, in real life, something like that simply wouldn't happen. But if you asked him, losing to a guy like Gangu felt impossible, especially since the two of them suddenly knocked out a whole bunch of delinquents. From Dong's point of view, the real-world mobile experience was becoming incredibly lifelike. As they started pressing the delinquents harder, it made him furious. Hyena wondered if the guy wanted to die, which annoyed Don because it looked like they were looking for a fight. Gangu tried to stop his friend from making a mistake, But Dong just cared less since he blamed himself for Hyen's misery and couldn't stop thinking about killing him, turning what Gangu saw as fun into a nightmare for Dong's life. Hyen realized the only thing he could thank Dion for was breaking his console, because that crash was the only way he got so much power. And besides, they still didn't know exactly what the real world was, but it felt like they'd somehow gained power because of it. After growing stronger, Hyen himself turned into a troublemaker, making him just like the other kids he once judged, and it must feel great to be on the losing side so you can justify being so cruel to everyone else. Hyen is boiling with rage as he hears these ridiculous lies. Dang lunged forward to grab him, stopping his charge right before it happened. Even though Hyen was desperate to charge at Dong and kill him instantly. Just then, Diong saw his chance and rushed forward to fight with excitement. As Hyen took a hard punch to his face, he quickly swung back and hit Dong right in the face. Thinking to himself, Dong realized Hyen now possessed superhuman strength, so the two began trading furious, violent blows. Gangu stood frozen in worry as they tore apart the infirmary. Don was amazed that such a big guy could move so fast. Even after gaining strength from the real world, Hyam was still terrible at fighting, and everyone could see it. Even the protagonist felt Hyam was still very weak from the game's power. After all, he had only just climbed to the second level and barely begun playing, so aside from a small boost in agility, his other stats stayed the same, but most importantly, Diong himself was an incredible person. His sharp awareness made him the school's top fighter, but if his attacks missed, the battle would never move forward. Given that he had become absurdly strong, it was only fair that something had to fight back against him. Standing tall with his rival once more, he was ready to beat him. Dion slipped out of the incoming punch and laughed as his opponent's swings went wild. Those were brave words for someone who had never once stood up against the pain he had suffered so far. So the rule breaker at HYM grabbed a tool from the infirmary, knowing a weak soul like him could never beat a seasoned fighter like Dion. Someone like Hyam was always meant to stay below him his whole life, simply because he acted so powerful and that was all he ever deserved. He'd seized the chance to end the fight once and for all, and maybe if they talked about the real world, he could even stop hitting him. Ha was still certain that once he got stronger in the game, he would wipe the floor with him. De-hong knew this was his only chance to end it all right now. Before Jengu could strike Hyen again, he kicked the weapon out of his hand. He just wanted to settle things with a chat instead of getting into another fight. Kim let out a sigh of relief as he realized two new folks had joined the game. Things were about to turn into a real problem, or maybe just way more exciting. She took a quick look at Gang's card and saw that even though his level was low and he hadn't spent many points, his stats were strangely high for some reason. Normally, to have strength like that, he'd need 5 times what he had, yet every single one of his stats was strangely too high. Their numbers swelled to 5 times more than anyone else's. At the same time, Dong was just as shocked as everyone else when his weapon suddenly flew out of his hand. Gangu was so incredibly strong that even Hyen couldn't compare to him. This made him laugh, as Gang replied that he stood on higher ground and had sharpened his points far better, which was the only reason. Now Dion realized he needed to really understand this real world he was in, wondering if it was some secret trick to make him stronger or if they had even swapped bodies to get power. Hyen shook his head, saying he wasn't worthy of knowing the truth and that they wouldn't tell him. So Gang stepped in to say that now wasn't the right moment and they should talk about it later. Don refused to stop fighting until he heard more about the game, promising to make sure the media knew about all the silly things they had done. Once he learned how to do it, their lives would be ruined, and Jenner kept holding Hye-on while he cursed Dang for those threats. Just then, Kim stepped up to ask if she could interrupt, but only to have a word with Gangu. She turned a blind eye to Hyen and grabbed Gangu, pulling him along to the council room. But Dang wouldn't let him go without settling things, and since Kim didn't care who Dang was, she just told him to get out of the way. He was about to threaten her and claim he ran the school, but a direct hit from the president left him with no time to speak. After Kim knocked Don down with a punch, she made her move to take Gangu for a talk. He had to follow her, terrified by how strong she was. She didn't ask his permission. She simply took his arm and dragged him along, no matter his protests. As they stepped into the next room, Gangu noticed she looked really down and said she didn't seem in a good mood. He nearly panicked, fearing he might have done something to make her mad. Kim simply said it wasn't anything special. She just wanted to check something. She sent him that gift in the game and sat tight, hoping he'd say yes. When Gangu noticed it, he realized it was an invitation to the training room that left him surprised. And even though the protagonist didn't know what it was, she simply told him to take it without asking why. As soon as he did, a brilliant flash blinded him and suddenly they were in a whole new place. Kay pointed out that this was the training room exactly as the name said. This spot let anyone walk in to check their stats or train, and even friends could enter together if they were registered. Gino asked why she'd brought him there, but she urged him to spend any leftover points first, leaving him confused by the sudden change. Kim didn't have a specific reason to fight him, She just wanted to go all out. So she chose the training room to keep the school safe. This completely caught him off guard since she suddenly decided to fight out of nowhere, and Gang felt worried that he must have done something wrong to make her want to fight. Kim told him she'd strike in 5 seconds, so if he still had any save chances left, he'd better use them right now. As she began the countdown, Gangu nervously checked his stats. Then she lunged at him, landing punch after punch on the protagonist. He was just a level 8 player, while Kim had already reached level 32. She really thought he would take this seriously. If Gangu keeps letting people off easy, he'll end up paying the price himself. The protagonist ducked away from the next hits, still confused as to why she was even fighting back. At least he hoped for a reason, but Kim just turned away and kept pounding the protagonist. She threw every punch she could just to hurt him, knowing that if he didn't listen to her, he'd end up badly injured, even though Gang couldn't understand what was happening and knew he couldn't actually die in the training area. So he chose to meet her strike with his own kick, sending her flying back. Kim couldn't stop thinking it wasn't an accident since he had struck her, so she demanded to know if he hadn't noticed anything strange while they fought. Gangu couldn't quite grasp her point, so she clarified that even though they were 20 levels apart, they were fighting almost evenly, with Gangu nearly catching up to her. She peeked at their game scores before the fight, and her numbers always climbed 5 times faster than anyone else's. She attacked him to check if it was just a glitch on her screen or a game error, but it turned out to be real. Now Kim was certain that Gangu had somehow cheated or that his character profile was broken. It was a rare glitch that made his stats 5 times better than everyone else's. The unexpected gift caught him off guard, and though Kim couldn't explain why it was so unusual, she knew she had never seen anyone like him before. Once the gang stopped to think about it, they saw he had only added a single point to his strength, but suddenly his attacks felt way more powerful than that. As he thought about it, he realized the only reason was that he had grown 5 times larger. Gangu was taken aback by the odd way Kim was laughing. She felt both nervous and thrilled that he was special, wanted him by her side, and kept their secret, though she worried others might find out. So Kim told him to stop talking and just be her only friend in the game with no other players. Gangu finally said yes, though he was still lost on how to make that power useful, since he didn't want to waste it all on something pointless after everything. Kim laughed at how clueless he really was, feeling so much more relaxed in dungeons and on easy missions with his low level that he couldn't believe it. Even though he could still do simple things like exercises or basic tasks, as he grew stronger, the missions and dangerous dungeons became so hard that sometimes he had to face impossible challenges all by himself. A few weeks back, Kim got 2 crazy jobs. One to climb Mount Everest and another to race all the way to China. Gangu felt a shock in his heart, realizing they still had to face those pointless missions. She could have easily ignored them without any trouble, but she made sure he remembered the penalties. If they hit game over, they'd lose out on useful perks like growing taller or becoming more attractive. Usually, those were just the kind of things that simply couldn't get any better in the real world. Gung-hoo was a seasoned gamer who could never quit a challenge like that, especially one so incredible that most people only dreamed of playing it. Even now, Kim couldn't wait to be carried by him, a sign that their bond would only grow stronger, and Gangu saw right away how ready she was to take advantage of his special gift. In any case, she decided it was time to turn back and leave the training room. They talked about something really important, knowing that no one else was around to overhear them. Kim tells Gangu that he's going to have to get used to traveling the way he just did. A brief light flickered into view, bright enough to startle but not burn their eyes unless they stared right at it. Soon the hero grew worried he'd missed his classes, but Kim reassured him that she kept up with everything, so there was no need to fret. Kim figured that time must have stopped or slowed down, since even though it felt like over 10 minutes had passed since they left the training room, the actual time hadn't changed at all. When the hero stepped into the novice dungeon and paused to think, he found that even after leaving, the time outside had not changed, making it perfect for practicing alone or taking exams. Jennu stared at Kim in shock that she was using a secret power to boost her grades, only for Kim to laugh it off by saying she just found a clever way to use the extra space, while her grades were already great without even stepping into the other world, which made Jengo chuckle before Kim suggested they head back to class to meet up and tackle a dungeon together after. As the hours drifted by, the hero stayed lost in his own mind. Hyen looked back to find his friend staring at him with a strange look in his eyes. Gangu noticed something was off about him and began to wonder what was wrong. For some reason, he was mad at him, and we can't forget Dang either. Now the hero knew he was in big trouble with those 2 guys right on his tail. Even Jaisen wore a strange smile while staring at him. He was sure she had absolutely zero interest in a loser like him, especially since he had even hit her boyfriend. Gangu couldn't focus on his lessons at all with the others staring at him like that. He just wanted the classes to end fast so he could finally leave for good. It felt like a real shame that he couldn't just walk away even when class was over, so he started wondering if he should move schools to finally find some peace in his life. Hours drifted by until the lessons were finally over. The moment the teacher walked out, Deong rushed to Gangu and Hyen to talk, just as a protagonist had fled in a similar scene. He only wanted to be by himself, but those two kept chasing him. Gang made a quick escape into the student council room, blocking the other two from catching him and leaving them wide-eyed from the shock of seeing Kim. Kim watched Gangu rush into the room, excitedly asking if he was ready for the dungeon and suggesting they enter a medium one, even though the truth was different. Gangu felt scared because a medium dungeon was still too hard for him, but she promised that they'd be okay as long as they stuck together, since the dungeon's level didn't really matter. They could just focus on having a little fun down in the dungeon. First, she sent out an invitation to join her team, and the protagonist said yes. Once they accepted, a sudden flash of light whisked them straight to the dungeon, leaving Gamu amazed because it looked nothing like a beginner's dungeon. When he stepped into the beginner dungeon, it felt like a rocky mountain filled with bears. She knew that the dungeon's terrain shifted every time they stepped inside, so the desert they stood in now might not be their next time. If you wanted to clear a medium-level dungeon, you had to be at least level 25, so she would tell him about her mission. Gango could boost his power 5 times over anyone else, so Kim felt sure they'd succeed at their current quest to hunt down 30 slimes in the medium dungeon. It didn't take long before a bunch of slimes popped up all around them. Gangu fumbled clumsily while trying to fix things, so Kim hurried away. She hoped she could look after at least half of them. She stepped back, watching from the sidelines to see how well his stolen powers would hold up in the dungeon. Gang, who got pulled into the slime fight, found himself in pure chaos. They pelted him like flying bullets, leaving no room to fight back because those slimes were somehow both incredibly fast and way too strong. Kim told him not to drop his guard. Even the tiny slimes were strong enough, which made perfect sense since they were inside a medium-sized dungeon. They looked pretty cute, but they still had to be put down the right way. The hero tried to strike them, but his foot got stuck in the gooey slime. His attacks weren't working, and Jenu started to wonder if he was just too weak. It felt like whatever he tried to do just bounced off them without hurting a thing. Kim asked if he'd like some expert tips to show that without real power, even common tricks won't work. When the slimes weren't attacking, he could see their weak cores and had to strike them before they fully formed, either with a spell or a weapon. Gangu had no spells and no idea where to find a weapon. That's when he remembered the wooden stick he had been given a while back. He grabbed the stick and struck the slimes, dealing damage so he could finally finish them all off. Kim figured that even though Gangu was only level 8, he could still fight slimes, even if his stats looked strange, like he was actually level 40. It didn't take long for the hero to wrap up the mission. After slaying the 30 slimes, they finally finished the job. Kim walked down from where she had been cheering for the hero who finally finished the mission. It didn't take long before the game noticed his win and started handing out all the rewards. Gangu leveled up, shocking Kim because the jump was way bigger than just one level. When she checked his character sheet, she found the hero was level 17, meaning he had climbed nearly 10 levels since finishing that mission. She had told him he couldn't handle such a hard mission or clear a dungeon like this, but now that he was with her, he could, even though she admitted she could hunt 100 slimes without gaining a single level while he would end up with a huge amount of experience. Since they could trade rewards, she offered to spend her new points on her stats, but Jenu was shocked when she insisted he do it right away, unaware of what immediate effects it might trigger. He paused to think about how he would change his stats if that happened. The protagonist decided to boost his stats because it felt like an online game, and the gang wrapped things up just a moment later. Kim suddenly punched the protagonist in the face while he was completely caught off guard and could barely react. When Gang noticed his attacks were getting even slower and his kicks were losing their strength, he found plenty of time to dodge them. Kim kept rushing forward, striking again and again. The two traded hits back and forth for a bit, with Gangu staying on the defensive the whole time. Truthfully, she was impressed because even though he gave her only a few points, his attacks were still stopped well this time. Gangu grumbled that she'd attacked him again without warning and hurt his feelings, even though the hit wasn't strong, and when she said the protagonist should be able to take a little pain, enough to kill a normal level 17, she also asked what would happen if he ever died in the dungeon. She explained that even though the dungeon felt like another world, it was still real, meaning if he died on a mission there, he would truly die in this life. Now that it was done, she proposed they gather their rewards and head back. She grumbled about the necklace that gave her 2 extra points of smarts, insisting it wasn't enough after all that hard work. Gangu offered Kim the necklace, but she turned it down since it was just junk to her, so he decided to keep it himself. Then he asked her why Kim spent so much of her time with him. Kim explained that her powerful teammate, who had stacks 5 times higher than normal, could help her clear impossible dungeons and let her level up easily. Gangu would see it too as the game grew harder and changed over time, so she decided they should return, and the two left the dungeon, But Gangbusai felt confused because the real world hadn't even felt like a second had passed. In just a flash, he shot up several levels and snagged a brand new item. Kim felt pretty good about the day, so she waved goodbye and headed off since she had other things to do. Yang felt it was time to head home, so she suggested they walk together. But as they walked out of the classroom, they spotted Diong and Hyan, who asked what those two fools were doing standing outside. The pair wanted to talk to Gangu, but he tried to run only to be caught right there, and they still demanded answers to the things they had promised to find out. However, Hyan soon noticed something was wrong with Gangu because he no longer had the same powerful presence he had just a moment ago, signaling that something strange had happened. Now was his moment, so the hero turned and bolted without a second thought. Before long, the hero made it home to his mother, who eagerly asked if he wanted food. But Gangu just said he was perfectly fine. He felt worn out from all the events that day, so he headed straight to his room to get some rest and have some time to himself. Even so, his mother asked if anything had happened at school that day. When he looked lost, his mom chose to ignore it and let him rest. The gang stepped up to clear the air and let everyone know there was no cause for worry. He insisted that the last event was just an accident and that things would soon go back to normal with no more trouble. His mother started to cry because the news made her feel relieved after walking around worried about her recent changes. Gangu promised her she had nothing to fear, yet a lingering worry still clung to her heart. Back in the room, the hero quickly got a few messages on his phone. Just as we expected, the real-world phones buzzed again, and RA popped up to greet us after such a bright day. He was likely lonely without any missions, but Gang said that even talking to him that day would have just led him down the wrong path and lost in the woods. RA was shocked to find he had leveled up so much in one day, so she asked him what he had been doing while he was away. Jenu was caught off guard when the assistant started chatting with him right away, even though he thought she was trying to avoid talking to him during that time. Anyway, RA forced a smile, paused to hand him a new mission, and promised they could talk about it before addressing anything else. Today's mission was to hook up with a friend, blast through the dungeon, and walk away with a box of random loot and rewards. But RA soon realized he'd already done this with a player named Kim, which made her sigh and decide to skip it entirely since she wasn't in the mood. If he stumbled, a mystery box of hair loss would instantly appear. Gao was stunned, feeling that losing that much hair randomly was just too much for her. So RA decided to let him go on the mission and wished him luck. He had 6 hours to finish the mission and bring the gang along. He had no choice but to run that same dangerous mission right after the first one. It sucked when the stress got so bad it made your hair fall out. Suddenly, his phone buzzed with a call from a strange number that felt oddly familiar, even though it wasn't saved in his contacts. When he answered the phone, he heard a woman's voice and wondered who it was, even though she asked if he didn't recognize it. That's when the woman mentioned she felt a bit let down because no one had noticed her. Then he recognized it was Jaisen and jumped in surprise. She laughed as the loser otaku finally recognized her voice after so long, because she had something important to tell him about her confession. But Gang was just fixated on her, which caught her off guard. Jaisen yelled in anger because the jerk just ignored her completely. But the protagonist was too embarrassed to say anything, confused about her sudden late-night call, so he panicked and immediately turned off his phone. Suddenly, the phone rang again and Gambu saw that Jaisen was trying to call him once more. It wasn't his usual reply, and even Jen was caught off guard. After all, he wasn't actually trying to get her to take the call. Jaisen's patience was wearing thin as that jerk still refused to acknowledge her confession. Anyway, finding out where he lives was easy, so later Gangu called Kim to meet at the park, only for her to confess that she thought she might have won him over, which he immediately rejected by reminding her it was serious because he had a mission to build a team and enter a dungeon. With almost no time left before it was over and the price of failure being a bald head, Kim burst into tears from laughing so hard at how ridiculous it all was. The gang roared in anger over this critical issue, but even while laughing, she promised to help and suggested they tackle a dangerous dungeon together. It was normally meant for level 30 players, but Gangu would find it a simple task. Without hesitation, he agreed to her invite, and she quickly swung open the dungeon doors. The pair stepped inside the massive dungeon, and Gangu marveled at its size, while Gamu was shocked to learn that even Kim had never seen a place this grand before. It was her very first time. She could have walked in any time, but since she was still too weak and below level 30, the place felt overwhelming, and now that she was standing there, her nerves were really getting the better of her. Right then, a sound so loud they thought the whole world was shaking. Their only mission in that middle dungeon was to take down the whole orc army. A huge horde of orcs burst out of the temple. Gung-Hu jumped in surprise at the horde of monsters charging at them and quickly asked her if she knew just how strong they could be. But even Kim didn't know, so she reminded him to be very careful. After all, if they died in the dungeon, they were already dead in the real world too. The dungeon they stood in was just the second one on the list, and since she wouldn't even try a place like this until she hit level 40, this was her first time ever stepping inside. Jenu felt worried and wondered why she had even stepped inside. She just laughed, knowing she had brought him there because she trusted him, seeing the great thief Gangu as a player she could use to her advantage. Even so, he felt terrified just thinking about taking on all those orcs by himself. Gangu didn't have long to wait before an orc slammed into him and sent him flying through the air like a piece of paper, while Kim reached for her weapons and charged them immediately. Maybe coming here was a bad idea, and she was starting to think that now. She kept swinging at the orcs until one suddenly jumped out from behind and made her scramble backward. Jenu rushed over to make sure she was okay, but she waved him off, saying she wasn't going to die from something so small. Trying to face them alone would only end in failure. Kim leaned in and asked if he really thought he could take down the hero. The orcs were huge and terrifying, but he just smiled and said he thought he could do it. Gangu rushed right up to an orc to fight, while she just stood there and watched. She knew Gangu was a real force to be reckoned with just by thinking about the last attack. He fought the weapon with no trouble, leaving those guys behind, while Kim watched him at level 17. He had no fancy skills or flashy moves, yet he mowed down the orcs like they were made of paper just by using his raw strength. After Gangu fought off the monsters for a long time, Kim's side felt relieved to see he was still below level 20 and had taken care of them all. By the end, Kim was left speechless because the show was so amazing. The game didn't take long to realize they'd finished the mission. After quickly boosting their levels several times in a row, Kim reached level 33 and felt a huge relief, especially since she hadn't leveled up in a long time and was worried she might get stuck after hitting level 30. Ganga said he grew much stronger after everything, and Kim agreed that his power came from the other intermediate dungeon, just as she had guessed. They just had to keep moving forward through even tougher dungeons together, because as long as they stayed side by side, she could reach the top level, and Kim felt so happy about that. She even wanted to kiss Gangu. After all, he was her golden goose. She was clearly just messing with him, even though she was truly happy deep down. They didn't get any rewards this time, so he thought he should go back, while Gangu laughed along like it was just a game, even though he was disappointed about missing out on the prizes. Back at the park, Gangu found he had leveled up to 25, but because he was so much stronger now, the missions no longer gave him enough experience. Anyway, Kim praised him for their great day together and agreed they could team up to clear other dungeons soon. But for now, she needed to turn her attention back to studying and school. The protagonist sighed, knowing he needed to seize this chance to head home. But then he noticed a message on his phone that made him gasp in surprise. Jizian sent a note saying she was heading to his place, and after everything that happened, they decided it was best to finally meet in person. Gang was stunned and worried that Diong had dragged his girlfriend into the mess, so he tried to annoy her because he knew he had made a move on Jizan, while Jizan just felt irritated and kept waiting for that idiot to show up. He left her messages and calls unanswered, acting as if she didn't exist. She was sure she'd kill him once she found him, while Gang just saw her glare and knew she was ready to explode. Most of all, he needed to understand how she discovered his address. He paused, thinking that if he just let her go, everything would fix itself on its own. But Jizan was so annoyed that he was willing to wait however long it took. But Gangu didn't expect his sister to be coming home. Jizan saw his chance and stepped forward to say hello. After learning she was related to Gangu, Jizan casually mentioned that they were once classmates. Jizan thought nothing was wrong, but Gangu stayed silent, leaving her sister shocked that he was ignoring her instead of showing off the stunning girl he'd finally found. While Jizan worried, her sister quickly ushered her inside, promising that her brother would be home any minute. Just as she was about to let Jizan in, Gangu came running up. He snatched Jizan by the arm and yanked her away in a rush. Even Jizan was stunned to see Gangu sprinting away so suddenly. She nearly fainted from running so hard, then paused to wonder why Gangu kept ignoring her calls and messages like he was hiding from her all along. She wondered why she was showing up at his house right now. She said he was doing it just because he kept ignoring her. The gang shot back that if she was just going to bother him, he had no reason to reply. Jizan questioned why his love for Dong caused her to hate him, only for him to explain that she was upset because he had gotten into a fight with her own girlfriend. That made her admit they had broken up a while ago, which left Gangu shocked at how fast it happened while Jizan seemed perfectly okay with it. She didn't care for losers, but since she'd heard Gangu liked her and he still had those fighting skills, she thought they could make it work despite him not being perfect. That's why Jizan decided to give Ganga a chance, a move that left him stunned. But she was dead serious and moved closer, practically shouting that she wouldn't say it twice. So Gangu should have felt a lot happier about this. She was a top-tier star who still took the time to show off to someone like him. Even so, Gangu was so caught up in his own thoughts that he didn't notice what she wanted, and he just bolted past her while ignoring Jizan's protests. His school days were just getting rougher than ever before. Jason kept complaining because he knew it was why they called him a loser, while the other delinquents watched the scene with shock. They decided they finally had to tell Dong the truth once and for all. When the protagonist got home the next day, his mother was surprised to see him up so early and happily made him breakfast. Then his sister stepped forward to ask if he had finally made up with his girlfriend. His girlfriend suddenly showed up and even came to visit their house, which left the other sister speechless since she had heard the news but still couldn't believe it. The gang stammered that it wasn't about that, but they wanted to hear more, claiming it was true since he was washing up, and the sisters knew Jason was a stunning girl he was dating. Everyone cheered when Jason discovered him, even though Gangu was yelling that she wasn't even his girlfriend and they were just guessing things. After sprinting back to his room, the hero found himself wondering why all this chaos had to happen. He still couldn't believe the girl finally confessed to him for the first time, and now Jason decided he had to return the feelings and chase after her.